Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
But who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And who is he?
Bruce Rivers, he's the criminal lawyer.
And what he do?
And he's gonna react to all the self-snitching.
Hi, this is Bruce Rivers. Welcome to another episode of Criminal Lawyer Reacts, where I'm a board-certified criminal defense lawyer reacting to various videos, and today we are reacting to What Pretending to Be Crazy Looks Like by JCS. Now, it's, mental health plays a big part in the criminal justice system. If you are not competent to proceed to aid in your own defense, they can't prosecute you. And on misdemeanors, they have to dismiss. And on felonies, they have a period of monitoring over many months. And if they don't do it within about 3 years, if you don't restore you to competency, then you're civilly committed, and they just can't prosecute you. I have a case like that right now where my client is charged with driving a vehicle into somebody thinking that person was going to harm their family. And it really is something, especially when they're languishing in jail and not getting the mental health treatment that they need. So without further ado, we'll talk more about the legalities of mental health and how it relates to the criminal justice system. But this is What Pretending to Be Crazy Looks Like.
This is 26-year-old Dawson McGee, sitting in a police interrogation room in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. The Monday night before, he stabbed his own mother to death for asking him to move out of the house and get a job.
All right, right there, stabbing somebody because you're going to suffer some consequence because of it looks like retribution. And retribution is not a mental health it's not indicative of a mental health issue. It's indicative of being a complete prick.
Dawson is unaware that he is being recorded on a hidden camera. In 3 seconds from now, he will hear the sound of the door being opened by a detective. And at that exact moment, you will see a remarkably noticeable switch in his demeanor.
Here's the other thing. When you are sitting there in a holding cell, and you're like he is, and you're just sitting there, you're being recorded the entire time, no matter where you are. So one of the things that they'll do is they'll leave you there for a while in order to elicit some kind of response from you. And so if you all of a sudden switch your mood from crying and they leave the room and all of a sudden you're kind of laughing, or you just switch your mood, it's indicative of manipulation or languishing in some other condition.
There's definitely something I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about what happened to your mom.
What happened to my mom?
Well, you tell me.
You see the hand shaking, and he looks like I'm Mr. Crazy. Well, that's not being crazy. That's just poor acting.
People called me and said something happened at home to Mom. They were very sad.
Mm-hmm.
What would happen to my mom?
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
And here's the other thing. When somebody's reacting like this, and it's clearly bullshit, and whether you can tell this is bullshit or not, I am just looking at this for the first time. It sort of looks like bullshit. It's consciousness of guilt. So when you're acting out like this, and later it's determined that there's no mental health issue, and it's acting, that's consciousness of guilt, and they can use that against you.
I was waiting for my brother and sister to tell me.
Okay. Well, so, was your sister home this weekend?
Wait, I'm supposed to have an attorney?
All right, am I supposed to have an attorney? Well, hey, guess what? If you're fucked up in the head, you're not going to know that you're supposed to have an attorney. It looks pretty savvy to me, but interesting, because if that is considered an unequivocal request for an attorney, the interview's got to stop.
If you want one.
Am I supposed to have I should request an attorney?
I should request an attorney. Gee, it seems like he knows what the fuck is going on. Give me a break.
Well, that's up to you if you like one. But I mean, we'd like to talk to you.
You're supposed to have an attorney. Go on,
It's the third time now he's requested an attorney.
I would offer that. I want to ask for an attorney.
I want to ask for an attorney. Right there. I want to ask for an attorney. Boom, the questioning should stop right then and there.
Do you want to ask for an attorney?
Yeah.
Okay.
It would come as no surprise that a judge deemed him fit to stand trial. A jury then found him legally sane, and he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his mother. All of which was in spite of a continuous charade of mental illness similar to the one you see here. Dawson clearly believed that his passage through the legal system would somehow be easier if he were presumed insane, which is a naive, yet somewhat common misconception that many suspects make when facing serious charges. They have this notion that a plea of insanity would either lower the severity of their punishment or liberate them from it altogether. That instead of being sent to prison, they would simply be released back into society.
Well, that's true. Some people do think that, and you're actually, what happens is you get committed. And if it's a violent crime, you're committed as mentally ill and dangerous, and then you go away to a mental hospital, which, in some respects is worse than a prison.
Perhaps with a free psychotherapeutic program to attend on the weekends. This is, of course, a far cry from reality. In the United States, if you're found responsible for a serious offense, but also found not guilty of the crime by reason of insanity, you will be institutionalized at a high-security psychiatric facility. These institutions are without question some of the darkest and most disturbing places in the system.
That is true. But you're not there forever. You remember what happened with John Hinckley after he shot Reagan? He was just released not too long ago. I mean, he was in there for 30 years, but...
You're not actually suffering from the crippling effects of mental illness. Living in this type of environment will be a mentally agonizing experience. The foresight of what occurs inside these units would make the majority wish to avoid them. But once you are in, it is very hard to get out, and you will have to serve the same, if not a greater amount of time than you would have had to serve at a regular prison.
That's actually true as well. You wind up serving more time because you're committed, and if you have an incurable mental health problem and you are a danger, then there is no end to your commitment.
So to put it briefly, if you commit a serious offense and then pretend to be crazy in order to get away with it, your life from that point forward will be an extremely dark and uncomfortable existence whether you manage to fool the system or not. But there is one benefit, which is the elimination of capital punishment. The United States cannot execute someone deemed insane.
Well, that and the food. The food is better at these facilities, too.
During the time of their
Better bologna
offense,
sandwiches.
which is the only conceivable reason a defendant would cling to this narrative even after knowing what lies ahead should it succeed. And this happens to be a notion that ties in closely to the primary subject of this video. It will focus on one particular individual whose interrogation footage is so fraught with blatant trickery that most of the segments presented to you won't even need suggestive commentary. You can simply observe and judge for yourself whether you see authentic behavior or not. But before showing you what pretending to be crazy looks like, we'll briefly show you a genuine case of the criminally insane, or at least a far more convincing one.
This indicates that there is some normal criminally insane. There isn't any normal. Everybody's different. I had one case where my client was a graduate of American University, Ivy League, and she was getting her PhD in psychology, and she thought that people were out to get her, so she put an ad in the paper for 10 bodyguards, and when the guy came to interview for the position, she was going to kidnap the daughter of a very prominent lawyer in town, take her up north, while she gets the ransom money and flees the country. And it was really quite something. But there is no set normal for what a criminally insane person is supposed to be like.
This is 18-year-old Jared Murray, a freshman at East Central University in Oklahoma. On a Wednesday evening in December, he asked fellow student Gennaro Sanchez for a ride to Walmart. Once they got there, Murray pulled out a handgun and made Gennaro drive to an isolated country road where he shot him twice in the head. He then attempted to hitchhike to Canada, but was soon apprehended by police on the side of the road.
One of the things, if you know the consequences of your actions, typically that shows some cognitive or a lack of cognitive impairment.
Immediately confessed to the crime once apprehended and was then interrogated by the arresting officer.
I went down to his dorm room and asked if I could be given a ride to Walmart in exchange for $20 gas money.
So he took you to Walmart?
Yes, sir.
And did you both go in?
No, we did not go in, sir.
And why not?
We pulled into the parking lot, then I pulled the weapon on him and demanded that he take me to Asher, Oklahoma, sir.
And why did all of a sudden did you decide that you needed to go to Asher?
Because I was planning to take him out into the country and kill him.
Okay. Did he say anything?
He panicked, went to pull out his phone. I yanked the phone out of his hand, and then he panicked some more, kept telling me not to kill him. To make him feel more comfortable, I unloaded the clip, unloaded the bullet from the chamber, handed them over to him, and that eased his nerves a little.
One of the things you'll find is that a lot of the people who are mentally not insane and incompetent, or people who suffer from a mental health condition, are very, very intelligent, especially if it's chronic, persistent mental illness. Very intelligent.
I pulled a second clip out of my pocket and set it on my lap.
And so you're driving east, and so I guess at some point, did you decide now was the time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what happened?
I loaded the gun quickly, chambered the round quickly, shot once, missed, shot a second time, hit, jumped out of the car, went around. He was driving 10-15 miles an hour, so it was rather slow. Ran around the hood of the car, and of course it was slow when he wasn't purposefully driving. Tried to pull him out, couldn't get him out until he already had hit the tree. Pulled him out there, dumped him into the, before I dumped him into the ditch, I heard him gurgling. I'm not sure if that was physiological or...
One of the things, if you notice his demeanor and matter-of-fact way of speaking without any kind of either remorse, regret, or fear of what's going to come his way, that's indicative of some kind of, there's something amiss psychologically.
process after death, but I thought that he might have still lived through that somehow because he was gurgling, so I shot him again and then shoved him down in the ditch.
He makes a half-hearted attempt to conceal the body with a handful of leaves and a stick. He then...
See, concealing the body and, that's all demonstrates a cognitive awareness of the consequences of your actions. And that's pretty much what you need to show to be competent.
Walks in the direction of the highway.
Did you get back on the highway?
Yes, sir.
And which way did you go?
No, sir.
And what were your intentions? You walking north?
Canada, sir.
You was going to Canada?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And fleeing to Canada, fleeing the jurisdiction, hiding your crime.
He states that his plan was to escape into Canada, but he had nothing to escape with, not even a passport.
I had tried hitchhiking most of the way because the only way this was going to work, factoring in my belief that y'all found the crime scene, is if someone were to give me a ride there and then. And then whenever your patrol car was pulling up behind me, I didn't know it was a patrol car. I stuck my thumb out and you was there for the rest.
Junior, I want to ask you just point blank, because, I mean, you sat here and confessed to
Pretty much everything.
in my mind, and I think you might agree with me, just cold-bloodedly killed a young man tonight.
Yes, sir.
Or last night. Have you ever killed anybody else?
No, sir.
You will now see the detective attempt to establish a motive for the crime.
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding what you got out of it.
Now, motive isn't something that's even an element of any crime related to homicide. All you have to prove is that he did it and it was intentional.
Can you help me?
I don't really get anything out of it.
Do you feel any remorse?
I'm sad that I got caught so quickly.
Tell me why I should believe you that there just was going to be one person that was going to suffer from your consequences of killing.
You have no reason to believe me, sir.
I guess I'm just having a real
See, his answers are super intelligent in the sense that there's nothing to argue with about his answers.
hard time understanding why.
The detective fails to establish a solid motive for a further 2 minutes. The discussion eventually lands on the victim's long-term girlfriend.
You don't think she's going to be upset, heartbroken?
I think she will be, sir.
How'd that make you feel?
No different, sir.
I think you've been honest with me. I think you've told me just straight up, right out of the book, what happened.
Yes, sir.
But, you know, you've done a terrible thing tonight.
Yes, sir.
You killed a young man.
Yes, sir.
Just for the simple fact of, I guess pretty much this is safe for you.
Yes, sir.
And what do you think should happen to you?
Death sentence, sir.
And why do you think you deserve a death sentence?
An eye for an eye, sir.
Do you believe an eye for an eye?
Yes, sir.
I mean, that's cold. Normal people do not think that way or act that rationally.
Jared Murray was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to a high-security mental facility where he is to remain indefinitely.
Anything to say for yourself today?
No, ma'am.
Any reason why you might have done this to this young man?
No, ma'am.
No reason.
No, ma'am.
You have nothing to say for yourself.
No, ma'am.
You want to tell the community anything?
No, ma'am.
Did you confess to police?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you proud of what you've done?
No, ma'am.
Do you have remorse for what you've done?
No, ma'am.
He appears completely void of human emotion. No regret, remorse, shame, nor fear. He had both taken a life and destroyed...
Yeah, when you think about this is just incredible. But he's really devoid of the human experience.
his own, yet seems indifferent to the circumstances. With respect to his interrogation footage, the most conspicuous element was the complete lack of self-preservation. He didn't once attempt to deflect blame, nor afford himself any type of justification for his actions. He simply spoke in a factual, non-biased manner, impartial to how his words may have been taken, or even twisted to be used against him.
You know, it's really incredible how difficult it is to get a not guilty by reason of mental illness. I think in 23 years, I've had 3 cases like that. And all of them were just out there. And far more out there than this guy was. If this was here in Minnesota, he probably would not have been found not guilty. He probably would have been found guilty and would be in prison.
There was no calculated structure to his behavior whatsoever. So with this notion in mind, let's move on to the primary subject of this video.
Put everyone, have a seat on the bar chair, all right? Put your hands up a little bit. Have a seat.
For starters, this guy's in a hospital gown, which means he either was injured or he's on the mental health ward.
No, do not think about getting up, all right, buddy?
This is 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz, who 3 hours and 55 minutes prior to this moment murdered 17 people at his former high school in Parkland, Florida. Among the dead were 3 teachers and 14 students, the majority of whom were 14 years old. A further 17 students were seriously wounded during the massacre. The gunman dropped his rifle 7 minutes into the rampage and then blended in with the crowd as he ran out of the building. He was at large for 1 hour and 20 minutes, during which time he stopped off at a Subway and then a McDonald's, where he sat down and casually spoke to one of the victim's brothers. The student was unaware that his older sister had just been shot through the chest by the man sitting across the table. The description of the shooter was transmitted by police over the radio, which led to an officer identifying identifying and arresting him on a street just 2 miles away from the school. He was taken to the nearest hospital and examined by a doctor for roughly 1 hour and 45 minutes. He was medically cleared and then transferred to the local sheriff's office where he was subjected to interrogation.
No, do not think about getting up, all right, buddy?
From the moment the subject entered the room, his eyes have been fixed upon nothing but the floor. He's held on to this downward-facing gaze as if he's either in a state of shock or disconnected from the moment.
So what's critical in this is that time that he spent with that person whose sister was killed and sitting at the restaurant talking to that person, because that's who that guy was right afterwards.
At the exact moment the door shuts, he lifts up his head to observe his surroundings. His behavior completely shifts once he believes no one is watching. If we look at his demeanor a moment earlier, we can see the contrast. He went from being detached to alert. His behavior changed as the environment changed, which is a recurring theme throughout this interrogation. It shows us that his mind isn't wandering off during these moments of apparent disconnection. He is in fact fully present and very aware of what's going on around him. As he looks up, his eyes immediately lock onto the camera. He now knows he is still being watched, and his following gestures will resemble that of someone with suicidal tendencies.
So there are two types of mental health defenses. One is claim of insanity, or I basically didn't know right from wrong at the time that happened. So basically I was insane when the crime occurred. The other one is I have a mental health defect that prevents me from assisting in my defense, so I'm not competent to proceed. And they're very high standards, because you have a very low, if you can just communicate with your lawyer and understand the basic principles, which most people can, that second one is pretty easily overcome by a prosecutor. And the other one, that you didn't know right from wrong, is very, very difficult, especially when you have evidence of concealment. So here he is trying to pretend like he's going to shoot himself. Worst thing that could happen to him is him living out the rest of his life in prison.
At face value, these externalized suicidal thoughts may seem genuine to some, but when framed with the rest of his behavior throughout this interrogation, they are exposed for what they really are: an act, a calculated attempt to garner sympathy and paint his character in what he believes to be a more positive light.
All right, how you doing, Nick? You all right? Gotta be able to speak so I can hear you. All right, I just need to ask you really your name and date of birth just to confirm I got it right, and then I'm gonna see you want a glass of water or something. What's your first name?
This is a situation where the proof against the suspect is already conclusive. He is without question responsible for the crimes under investigation, making the pursuit of a confession non-essential. The police know he did it, but they need to know why he did it, which would already require a complex strategy in order to obtain the correct information.
The police do not need to know why he did it. You don't need like I said, motive is not something that they need to prove. It's not an element of the crime.
But the suspect's first recorded statements upon his arrest have now made the procedure considerably more difficult.
What's going on today, bro?
The demons, man.
Demons?
Voices.
Yeah, no problem.
Voices.
Voices and demons?
Where's the voices? What happened?
Shut up. Just be quiet, man.
Demons, man. Voices.
These two words have now forged the primary stratagem of his own interrogation, which is to cut through deception under the guise of supportive examination. The questions will be designed to lock him into a specific narrative about his alleged psychosis, while simultaneously giving him the impression that his responses are for his own benefit. Anything he says now can be used to refute any amendments he might come up with at a later stage. We all know that after this interrogation, he will have significantly more time to think, study, and even seek guidance from professionals about how the legal system interconnects with mental illness. Yet the majority of this forthcoming knowledge could be useless to him depending on what he says during these moments. The more details he gives away, the less options he will have for his defense later on. But pursuing this objective is complicated, as there are two very common scenarios for when this type of suspect gets interrogated. And just to be entirely clear, by this type of suspect, we mean someone who is 1. Pretending to be insane, and 2. Not fooling anyone. Their most common response is to simply shut down. They regress into total silence or some type of catatonic state, and the interrogation never gets off the ground.
And if you ask for a lawyer, pretty much you're guaranteed that you at least on the second prong, know that the consequences of the legal system and you're not incompetent.
Common response is the exact opposite. They erupt into hysteria or supposed delirium, and everything from that point forward becomes incoherent. The lead detective, John Curcio, must not allow either of these scenarios to transpire, and this makes the first 2 minutes absolutely crucial. He needs to create a positive first impression and resemble the furthest thing from a threat, while at the same time maintain a presence of authority. His temperament will be easygoing and non-confrontational, but also encouraging when extracting a response. His role at this moment is the ally. He needs to be liked, respected, but must not be feared. Not yet anyway. Going off the suspect's initial demeanor, the detective will know that he is far more likely to regress into a state of silence at this opening stage, and if he can prevent that from happening within the first 2 minutes, he is over the first obstacle.
Right, then I'm going to see you want a glass of water or something. What's your first name? Come on, Nick. Huh?
Nicholas.
Spell it for me.
Okay.
Come on, I'm old. You got to talk so I can hear you. N-I-K. O.
L.
Okay. A-S. And what's your middle name? Come on, man, speak so I can hear you.
Jacob.
Jacob. J-A-C. What's your date of birth? Okay, you need to relax, because I'm the last detective or policeman you're going to have to talk to. So right off the bat, that should be somewhat comforting to you to know that I'm the last guy you got to talk to. But the thing about it is, look at me. I got to be able to hear you. Okay? So all I want to do is get basic information from you, and then we'll get into the, whether you want a glass of water, all that stuff. What's your date of birth?
09.
January?
09.
09 September.
The investigation team already know the answers to these basic questions. Their only purpose are to initiate a response, and their non-threatening nature make it more likely for the suspect to engage.
Establishing a rapport for an officer like this, especially in a high-profile, because like he said, they don't need his information, but there's a lot of politics going on here. The police department has to have some answers for the general public later. And so that's what this is for. It really has nothing to do with the case in so much as proof that he did what they said he did. But it is consumption for the public as to, why this happened and how to prevent it from future occurrences.
They're essentially the opening wedge to get the two-way dialogue flowing. And although the suspect is still partially committed to his catatonic state, as we can clearly see, he is still responsive, making it unlikely for him to regress into complete silence from this point forward. Everything up to this moment has gone to plan. The detective has one foot in the door, and he can now develop the relationship from a more secure position.
And if you look how close he is, crowding that space, and a lot of these guys are bigger guys, and if you look how small the defendant looks in that scenario, that dominance, that physical dominance, is something that they rely heavily upon.
Goes about this with a standard method of rapport development, the offer of food and water.
All right, let me do it.
By the way, offering food and water or depriving somebody of food and water in order to get a statement is illegal.
You want cold water? You don't know if you want cold water? Thank you. Well, I'm going to bring in 2 because I want one. It was hot, and if you decide you want to have it, that's fine. You sure you don't want something to eat? Okay.
The refusal to accept food and water is a familiar response which you may have already seen on this channel. It's a glaring manifestation
That cop hasn't refused a whole lot of lunches, I can guarantee you that.
of shame. This is not to be confused with guilt nor remorse, both of which require the acceptance of responsibility, which in turn directs our focus outwards on the feelings of others. Shame, on the other hand, shifts our focus on the perceptions of others towards ourselves. The subject is afraid of how it will look if he accepts the offer considering the circumstances. He instead wants to appear as if he's so negatively affected by the events that he's unconcerned with meeting his basic needs.
Of course, I have so many different keys. All right, I'll be right back.
One of the things is that, once the cop leaves, probably doesn't realize he's being recorded. And the cop doesn't have to tell him he's being recorded. But he does have to read him his rights. And if the cop never read him his rights during any of this, it all gets thrown out the window. And that's one thing we didn't see, and I don't know if it is contained on this video, but when you're in custody and there's interrogation, they have to read you your Miranda rights. And it doesn't look like they did that in this case, or maybe they did it prior to him entering the room, but it should be on camera.
Once again, his demeanor abruptly switches when the detective leaves the room. With his head buried in his hands, it's anyone's guess as to what is going through his mind at this moment. But what you are about to see next is extremely revealing. Cruz was a left-handed shooter. The surveillance at the school would confirm this, and if you pay close attention to the movements of his hands in the next moments, although very subtle, you can see that he's reimagining holding his weapon. But what's more telling is how his demeanor abruptly stops and then completely switches right before he looks in the direction of the camera. He goes from holding a rifle and beginning to smirk, to then pretending to cry and reverting back to his suicidal mannerisms. This all occurs in under 4 seconds.
I don't really see him pretending to hold his firearm.
It could be assumed that for a brief moment, he was not only recollecting the attack, but gaining gratification from doing so. He then remembered he was on film, giving reason for the sharp adjustment. His true self was reliving the attack and enjoying his work, while his false self was so dejected to the point he was...
That is hocus pocus. All in 4 seconds, he's able to dissect that. Not sure that I completely buy that.
Internalizing suicidal thoughts. Complete opposites. His next calculated charade is one of self-harm. He first bites himself without drawing blood, or leaving any marks that were visible in his jail intake photographs. He then scratches and squeezes at the 2 needle punctures in his arm from where his blood was taken at the hospital. At the very moment the detective re-enters the room, he will act as if he's desperately trying to conceal his self-injurious behavior.
All right.
Setting aside the glaring contradiction that he just murdered and maimed dozens of people while leaving himself without so much as a scratch, it's the frequency of these little charades that makes their deception so transparent. This is a person who is not self-injurious, pretending to be someone that is. But it's such a feeble attempt at feigned self-harm, it would almost be a comical moment if the circumstances weren't as horrific.
Well, if they're not bleeding anymore and you want them off, we can pull them off. I'll get you a garbage can. You want them off? Just put them on the throw them on the floor in the corner. All right, this one is mine, because I already opened it. This one's yours in case you change your mind.
The next 4 minutes are the extremely tedious process of getting the subject to engage further through basic questions.
You see him lean into the subject. They do that to crowd the space, to feel like if I talk to him, he'll back up. So as you can see, there's a lot of complexity to the mental health system and mental health issues as it relates to the criminal justice process. And we'll follow along, and so this is lengthy and complex. So we've broken this into 2 videos. So this is part 1. So make sure you stay tuned for part 2. If you're watching this, you should also follow us on Instagram. You should follow us on Twitter, Patreon, and if you want to help stop snitching, support the cause, you can get that on Patreon. And we will do part 2 next time, so you stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.